All right, so this is Glory Turnbull interviewing Bill Birmingham. This is our third session of the Oral History Interview Project with CoBALT, the Coastal Bend Archaeological Logistics team. So, Bill, what can you tell me about digging on Labelle?
Labelle, that was a very interesting dig, program. And anyway, that was one day in particular, I went down into the bottom of the hull, down the steps, and was gonna do some excavating, but the channel NBC crew came up about that time, so anyone that wasn't part of the actual Texas Historical Commission crew had to get out, so I went up on top to screen. But before that, I got to see they had a cluster of kitchen items. Most of them were copper. There were spoons. There were little, it's called sieves, where they would take a sheet of copper and punch a bunch of little holes in there to strain any, like you would do rice or anything like that, to drain the water off. And we got to see that kitchen, utensils and everything. And then next to it was a case of muskets. They were, of course, you know, some of them were in bad shape. The metal was okay, but real rusty. And the wood was just about to deteriorate. But anyway, that, and then another case of tomahawk heads were laying down there. And then musket balls, they were just, what they would do, they would have a keg, a huge keg, probably about 3 foot high and maybe 30 inches in diameter. And all that had rotted. And the musket balls were just a large heap of musket balls laying there. That's just lead musket balls. I don't remember what caliber they were, but they were just tons of those things. And we also found them at the Fort St. Louis site also, a bunch of musket balls plus the flintlocks. And when I went up after the CBS crew came up down there, when we got out and went up on top and started screening. And what was really strange, when you're screening this debitage, not debitage, but the shell and whatever's down there, you'd find these little bitty pins, straight pins, just little short, regular straight pins. And as you were moving your hands across there, there was nothing that would really cut you, but the little pins would say, once in a while you'd get stuck in the finger, there you'd have a little straight pin sticking in your finger. That's one way to find it rather than observation. And we also found beads, these little glass beads. Some of them were black, red, white, and some of them were just beautiful little beads that they brought over on the ship, the Labelle. And back to Labelle now, there on the bottom of it, we also saw there was a case of beads. There were just 3 different colors, white, black, and red. And I don't know how many thousand beads that were in that one box. So that was all trade beads. And in just about every bucket you had from down below would have beads in them. And the beads were, once they would go, they would take the material they screened, they would take that to the main lab in, not Rockport, but anyway, the main lab. And they had people, volunteers that would go through this. And if the material was, in other words, when we screened, we would bag it up in baggies, and it was still wet. And it would, most of the time, the beads would stick to the shell. There's a solid shell in there. And when they would go through that, the beads would stick to the shell, and they would discard that. And I would get say a 4-gallon bucket, take it to the house with me. And I'd go through it a little at a time, let it dry out, and then go through it a little at a time, and I'd found a vial, medicine vial, about so tall, 3 inches tall, full of beads. And that's at the Museum of Coastal Bend now. Let's see what else is on there. Where we find all kinds of pieces of wood from the ship itself. They were so small they weren't worth keeping. And that's about it on the Labelle.
Right. So where was Labelle? Like, was it like on land? Was it underwater to some extent?
Labelle was actually underwater off the barrier island called Matagorda Island. And out of Rockport, it's closer to Rockport than, not Rockport, excuse me, but to Port O'Connor, real close to Port O'Connor. And you can get to it by boat. And what they did is after they found the wreck itself, they measured out exactly where they made a cofferdam, an inner cofferdam and an outer cofferdam. And in between, they would pour shell and sand to make it like a solid dam around. And then they had to have pumps, generators, and pumps to pump sump water. In other words, they had the water would still filter in, you had to pump it out and keep the pumps running just about constantly. It was a constant roar. And once you were down in the pit where the boat was, the ship, and excavating, that roar was so great, it just almost, you probably needed earplugs really, but it was a relief once you got out of there because it was noisy. Echoing from the wall. What they would do is take these big plates, they're interlocking plates, and drive one down. This is on the outer perimeter of around the wreck itself, the shipwreck. And they would drive them in, they would interlock each one until they made a complete wall, and then made another outer wall, same way, interlocking panels, and then would fill that in with debris, whatever, sand, and that was your platform to work on. And but they even had a person living on there the full time to keep, just in case somebody would come up and try to take something or do something damage to the, maybe a looter, in other words, what you'd call a looter. But nobody ever did that. They had enough sense not to try that. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Right. So why did NBC show up?
The what?
Why did the news station come down?
That was part of the PR with the Texas Historical Commission. They wanted, and I guess news people like the national news got in touch with them and heard the story and wanted to do a nice story, which they did a good write-up on it, and it was on the news. And I'm not sure how many, I'm sure there were several of them that did it, but I was there with that NBC news came in, but there was others that did the same thing. Crews did it. And of course, THC did some filming that, on their own, plus a lot of still pictures of all the units. I have several pictures of me down in the bottom too. I think the museum has a copy of that somewhere. Yeah.
Right. Is Labelle the only underwater archaeology that you've done?
Right, yes. It's the only one, yeah. And there is a Labelle, not Labelle, but a Labelle that is still out there. They know where it is, but it's under so much sand, and it would take probably another cofferdam, at least probably just a single wall, but it'd be so expensive. And for right now, unless they get a big donor, they'll probably never excavate it. But it's under sand right now. That as the years pass, centuries pass, these islands and sandbars move, and this particular sandbar is totally covered the Mcneil. And there's another ship that is out in the Gulf. It's Spanish, but the Mcneil is a French, but the one out in the Gulf is Spanish. And there again, it's just too expensive to do that. So, you know, the Labelle was in the bay, which has been protected from the Gulf. The Gulf, you have huge waves that come in and wind, and it's almost impossible to do. But if it's a protected bay like the Labelle was in, it was protected waters, and you could make, unless you got a real strong north wind, which happened that's what sank the Labelle in the first place. The norther blew it in and broke its anchorage, and it went across the bay and finally beached itself on that sandbar there by the Matagorda Island on the reverse side.
Right. So switching gears to another site, what can you tell me about the Mcneil site?
Well, the Mcneil site was first discovered back in 2001 or two, somewhere along in there. And what happened, they were removing topsoil for yards, people's yards and new buildings, you know, for topsoil. And as they went in, they dug into, this area is is a huge area. I'm saying probably 19 square acres, probably. And that's just that we know of. And there's a ridge that runs along, and I know there's sites in that, within that ridge. It'd probably be, no telling how many acres of site material. But where we are, it's probably roughly 19 acres. And we've narrowed it down to there's some burial areas, which as they were excavating their topsoil, this blade would come in and pick up the dirt, put it in dump trucks, and they would haul it off, or to a shaker or screener that would screen the big rocks and the roots and things like that out. And then the topsoil that would come out, they would take that to people's yards. But there were human remains found in that, and which we retrieved a lot of that, and which is now reburied at the site. And of course, the new law said we probably wouldn't anyway excavate a burial unless it's just being exposed by erosion, Mother Nature, or somebody's heavy equipment goes in. But there's a law now that you have to report it. So we just do not even excavate in that burial area. And then we set up a datum system with a little concrete datum, and that's coordinates. It's on a meter square unit, and we laid it out where there's area 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, patio 1 and 2, and burial area 3, which this is before the new law came in. There was a skeleton right on the surface almost, and we excavated there, removed it, and it was analyzed and then reburied close to the main datum. And the ones at burial area 1 and 2, where they were exposed from the front end loaders picking up the dirt, topsoil, we had those analyzed and then reburied those at the same place. So they're all reburied. And we, like I said, we won't be excavating or even doing any excavations in that area anymore because of the new laws, and just leave them alone, which that's the proper thing to do. And then we have the area 4, where we dug a 3 by 2 meter unit and went down 2.5 meters. And we figured that for every foot of deposition of the soil that we went through was 1,000 years. So we went all the way down to the bottom. We hit to the bottom, which is clay. There was a golondrina, which is 9,000 to 10,000 years old. And so we figured that was and also the same, after the main excavation, we had a geomorphologist come in. He was an A&M graduate student. He came in, did his dissertation, master's thesis on the wall of that area 4, the 3 by 2 excavation unit. He laid that out and had a nice report on that, which we have. So he did his master's thesis on that. And then we also have, we call it the burial area 4 extension. And that was, we did a bunch of units there, and we went down the same thing and down onto the clay and found these paleo points, but we don't know what they are. They're ground, but there's no name for them. And we found also a net sinker and Bill Andice point, which they're pretty rare. And then another area 5, we found bison bone, a cluster of bison, and that is about the only place where we have found bison bone. The rest of the site has been deer, and you would think with, say, like in patio 1 and 2, you would think that you would find bison there, but all we found was deer bone. So evidently the bison weren't there at that particular time, or they just weren't hunting them. Evidently the deer were easier to process than the bison. So we figured that's why they were eating the deer rather than anything else. And then there's another area we call the Aquapoints, and it has actually Spanish contact. By that mean, we found a glass point, a little green glass, that was probably a Guerrero point. That's a mission point. and it was broken and reworked. It's a real short little thing, green glass. And then down below that, you'd find the pertese and then the scallon. And on the surface, we found an aquapoint. At the time, it was just a scallon variant, we called it. So Dr. Hester was doing his type book, new type book, with he and Richard McReynolds and Sue Turner, so the three of them. And Dr. Hester says, Bill, why don't we come up with a new point? That looks like it's a new style point. Do y'all have any of those? I said, yeah, we've got one that we found at the Mcneil site, and there's a series of other sites in Victoria County that we found the same type of point. And so he said, well, why don't y'all write that up? So we did. We wrote the description, and we have, I think there's about 12 or 15, at least, that the museum has in the museum there that are an aquapoint. And so we wrote up the description, and of course Tom came up with it. Dr. Hester came up with the date, and it's in the type book that Hester has out.
Right, so you got to name the Anaqua?
Do what?
Did you name the Anaqua?
Yes, no, I think he called it, he said, he suggested maybe the Anaqua, since y'all found it in an aqua area. I said, well, that'd be a good name for it, an aqua point. We were going to name it the Dry Creek site, which there were some from the VT12, the Vic Urban site, and there's several others that had the points that are, an aqua points. And we figured that these were contemporaneous with the scallon points, because they're the same, just about the same time period. And it's due to the excavations, there's never been any actual separation by layer of the Anaqua or the scallon. So they're interchanged. So we figured they were about the same time period.
Right. So what are some key differences between Anaqua points and scallons?
Okay, Anaqua, the scallon is, the base is roughly straight across, and then the barbs come in and then out like so. And sometimes they're serrated, sometimes they're not. By serrated, I mean that there's little saw teeth on the edges, parallel edges. And then an aqua point is a U shape. It's definitely real deep U shape and to a point. And usually the top barb are wider than the notch barb. So that's a distinction. And they are also well flaked and have serrated edges. So some don't, most of them do. Most of them have the serrated edges. And the one that we have, I'd say that was the one that caused it to be named the Anaqua site. It has not deep notches, but enough serrations on it. So when you flake, you leave a little point on either side of your flake score, and that's what. So it's, but some of them are intentionally notched in deeper than the normal flake little notch you would get.
Right. That's really interesting. So what can you tell me about CoBALT? What is CoBALT?
CoBALT is a group of avocational archaeologists, interested people in archaeology. And we have, I think, 3 members that are the Texas Historical Commission. We're stewards, and which myself and Jimmy Bloom, and he's not a member of CoBALT, but he's from Victoria County. And then we have Frank Condren from Edna and Ben McReynolds from Goded County. And if this Texas Historical Commission gets a call from a landowner or a project that's going on, like the city of Victoria called recently and said they're building a soccer field, and do you know of any site that would be on that particular property? And so we'll investigate and then get back with them and say, no, it's okay, go ahead and do your construction. Or the farmer, the landowner has a construction going on, a road or whatever, we'll go out and look at it. And if it's a site there, we'll recommend to do a survey or maybe a test excavations and leave the rest alone. And the material we find does not go to us at all. The CoBALT or the THC people, they go to the museum here in Victoria or the landowner. But CoBALT was started when we were doing Fort St. Louis. We were working at the lab, and the remnant of when Fort St. Louis shut down, we just, as a group, we started on the Mcneil site. So we called ourselves, Judd Austin was the one who came up with the Coastal Bend Archaeological, Coastal Bend Archaeological Logistics Team. There you go. That was a tongue twister. But anyway, Judd came up with the idea of that one. And which before that, we had, some people would call us the Victoria Group, the Victoria Bunch, and stuff like that. So we've been and I think I'm the only one left of the old group. The rest of them are gone, and which we worked on various projects, around here, excavating the Presidios, VT8 and VT11, VT11, and that's the mission. And the other one was Presidio, and we've excavated those. And there's other various sites that we've excavated. Burst site below the Coletta Creek Reservoir Dam. It's right, beautiful site there. It's a Perdise type with the buffalo remains. The Perdise people hunted bison. We found ribs, jaw bones, hip bones, articulated feet, hoof, and everything from a bison. And but anyway, the old group is gone, and I'm the only one left of that group. I think, yeah, I'm the only one left.
So when was CoBALT officially formed, and when was this previous group sort of formed?
Oh gosh, the other ones were formed back in the early 80s, excavating Blue Bayou and the missions. That was the old group, the Victoria Group, or Bunch, we called it. And then CoBALT, like I say, was just started back in 96, and when we actually started the Labelle, and after 96, 98 is when the Fort St. Louis was discovered. And that group of volunteers, which included Frank, Judd, myself, and Nelson Mark, who's not here anymore, and Frank, Jimmy Bloom, several other people. I can't think of the names offhand, but anyway, it was just a continuation of the Fort St. Louis project. We just, other groups came in, other members came in, and we've got quite a few new ones at present, that came in and are working at the Mcneil site now. We're excavating. And we also have an intern, which is Glory, who's interviewing me. She's working at the site and doing a very good job. She's hired, and but one of these days she's going to go off to Scotland and Wales, right, for her finishing her education. And then we hope she'll come back.
Well, I hope to be back.
Right.
Everything is so exciting here. Would you say that you had any mentors when you were not just getting into archaeology, but after you'd been doing it, but before you started using the sort of state system of documentation?
Okay, I basically started my own system, and then I met another. This is when I was strictly collecting, and didn't know what archaeology really was. But I said, hey, I need to keep records of this stuff. And then I met another guy that Smitty Smidland, who's we've worked quite a bit together on different sites all over the state. And he introduced himself to me through another mutual friend. And he said, there is such thing as archaeology. And I said, oh, well, okay. And we were at a meeting in San Antonio. We met Dr. Hester when he was a graduate student, and he gave a talk on Paleo Indians. So we approached him after the meeting and said, Tom, you called him Tom, man, Tom Hester, said we were, I think, in our 30s, and he was in his about 20. So he comes over and we show him the photographs and drawings of all of the material we were finding, especially the paleo stuff and the artifacts. And from then on, we've been good friends since then, and we've interchanged correspondence, publications, whatever. And we tell him that Tom, you really helped us out, and he'll say, no, you guys helped me out. So anyway, we're mutual benefit to each other. And other archaeologists too. Steve Black, he was worked on the Coletta Creek project with us, and he in turn went to Tarl, Texas Archaeology Research Lab, and in turn, after that, he went to Texas State, where he's retiring now, doing catch up on some of his publications. He was a very good person to work with. And there's various ones that I can't even think of the names right offhand right now, but those are the bases. And Steve, not Steve Black, but Harry Schaefer, he's another good one. And Mont Davis was way back when I first started. He was the director of the first dig at the Presidio La Bahia, not La Bahia, but the Presidio de la Reto, the VT8 in Victoria County here. He was in charge of that. And then also the second time was Curtis Tuttle, who was the state archaeologist, and we worked together with Curtis Tuttle and Pat Allinger. She was a state archaeologist. We worked with her quite a bit. And there's other, Brad Jones, who is a state archaeologist now. We worked with him and the museum back and forth. So that's about it.
Right. So you mentioned a couple of names that I've seen in the museum vault. Would you say that you've met or been friends or acquaintances with all of the people who've donated their collections to the museum?
Right, yes. Yes, I have Ed Vogt, Smitty Smidlin, Virgil Branch, Cecil Calhoun, all these guys were in the original group. Some of them would be interested in for a while and then they'd quit, but they were collecting and kept good notes. And through when the museum, let's start off with the Smitty Smidlin, myself, and Ed Vogt decided to donate our artifacts from VT-15, 41 VT-15, the Johnston Heller site. So I loaded all this material up, took them to Tarl, and Jake Bourbon did his master's thesis on the VT-15. And I was out in the backyard one day and I got a call from Smitty. He says, Bill, are you sitting down? I said, well, no, but I can. So I sat down. I said, okay, shoot. And he says, well, there's 37 points that we sent up there are missing. I said, what? So anyway, I called the curator, which is Laura Nightingale at Tarl. And she said, Bill, it's 99 points that are missing, not just 37, 99 points. And what had happened, there's a style of point called a Moorhiss point, Moorhiss, M-O-R-H-I-S-S. And usually they have asphaltum on the base for hafting. And it's like a glue. And Richard Mcneil is the one who does most of our drawings, and the drawings for Hester's type book. He had borrowed those points from Tarl, and he drew those off. Luckily here, I've got drawings, plus I've got Xerox copies of all of the material that was, and these points were stolen. They took a bolt cutter and cut the lock in the warehouse at the storage area at Tarl, and opened the drawers and stole most of the Moorhiss points, real pristine, beautiful examples of Moorhiss points with asphaltum. They stole those, plus a bunch of other material, and it was for VT-15. And then they also, we thought they had stolen the paleo points, which they have Golondrina, and a bunch of clear forks and all these other tools. And anyway, we found those later on, but the 98 points are still gone, missing. And they figured it was an inside job. So I called the Tarl, and Dr. Hester was the curator then, or not curator, but director of Tarl. And I told him, I said, Tom, I said, the Museum of Coastal is now opening up, and could we, since you haven't, when I was told before, well, I'll back up a little bit, I was told that, about these artifacts. And I said, well, what are y'all doing? You're not keeping good track of these points or what? She said, well, it's your responsibility because you haven't signed the deed. And I said, well, I've been trying to do this for 2 years, get a deed signed, and you never have sent me a form. So I said, I'll tell you what, I want them back. I want to donate them to the Museum of Coastal Bend. And so the Museum of Coastal Bend accepted them, and my entire collection, plus Smedland's, Virgil Branch, Cecil Calhoun's, Ed Vogt, and there's several others. And then there's CL2. That was a site that was excavated by Coastal Environment. And they, in turn, were going to, after they got through with them, they were going to donate them to, okay, yeah, we were, with all these collections, okay, CL2, it's the Guadalupe Bay site. And what Coastal Environment was through analyzing everything, and it went to the museum. Well, I'll back up. They were trying to get those points, and the landowner was irritated at the archaeologists for some reason. Something happened. I still don't know what it was, but the guy told him he wanted that stuff back. He said, just dump it on my driveway. I don't care what, but he was mad. And at the time we had an interim director, and she called him and emailed and whatever, tried to get in touch with him. And I said, well, let me try, give me the number. So I called the guy at the house, at my house that night, and talked to him and said that we would love to have that material here at the museum. And anyway, the way I presented myself and the museum, for some reason, he mellowed for some reason, you know. But anyway, then I told him, he said, well, when he brought the material up to the museum, he said, well, I would like to keep something for my kids and my kinfolks. And I said, let me tell you, Mr. Parker, it was his name, Parker. I said, Mr. Parker, I said, I have an idea. I said, take your best point that you have, little arrow point, the best one you have. I can make a mold of that, cast it in silver for you. How many of you need? He said, oh, you can do that? I said, yeah. I said, that way the collection will stay intact. So he accepted the offer. So I cast him, I think it was 7 of them. And I actually cast 9 of them. And he said, after he came back to sign the deed of gift, and he said, I gave him, and he said, oh, by the way, is there any way you could make 2 extra ones? Like I have 2 ants. I said, I just happen to have 2 extra ones here. So I gave it to him. So we have the entire collection of CL2 at the museum now. So, and I think there's probably other collections I've got, but that's responsible for. But that's part of my job, you know, as a steward.
So next time we can talk a little bit more about the founding of the museum, but let's go ahead and call it quits for today.
Okay, that sounds good.